So, hello everybody, this is Bhante, Joe here, and I'm just here at the Tunakuti and thought to record. Actually, it's a bit of a special day today, planning to record a short reflection on the Sri Lankan forest tradition for Buddhist insights. So, it's actually something that I pre-planned a little bit, which isn't usual, so a bit of a special day. So we can maybe start with a little meditation, so we can lean forward a bit and arch the spine, and look about 3 feet in front, and close our eyes. And can spread thoughts of goodwill to our right-hand side, wishing may all beings to my right be happy and at ease. May they put in place the causes necessary to be happy and at ease. And we can make the mind infinite, can make it unbounded, all the way to the ends of the universe and beyond, in every dimension. May all beings to my right be happy and at ease. And we can spread thoughts of goodwill to our right-hand side and our left-hand side, wishing may all beings to my right and my left be happy and at ease. May they put in place the causes necessary to be happy and at ease. And we can spread thoughts of goodwill to our right-hand side, our left-hand side, and in front, wishing may all beings to my right, my left, and in front be happy and at ease. May they put in place the causes necessary to be happy and at ease. And we can spread thoughts of goodwill to our right-hand side, our left-hand side, in front, behind, all around in all 4 directions. May all beings in all 4 directions be happy and at ease. May they put in place the causes necessary to be happy and at ease. And we can spread thoughts of goodwill to our right-hand side, our left-hand side, in front, behind, and above. May all beings in all 4 directions and above be happy and at ease. May they put in place the causes necessary to be happy and at ease. And we can spread thoughts of goodwill to our right-hand side, our left-hand side, in front, behind, above, below, all around in all directions everywhere. May all beings all around in all directions everywhere be happy and at ease. May they put in place the causes necessary to be happy and at ease. And we can make the mind infinite, can make it unbounded, all the way to the ends of the universe and beyond, in every dimension. May all beings all around everywhere be happy and at ease. And before we finish meditating, can contemplate impermanence, contemplating how everything that's subject to arising is subject to ceasing. It's not me, it's not mine, it's not myself. And can open our eyes. And do a short reflection on the Sri Lankan forest tradition. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Dutiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. So, hope that everybody's having a great day wherever it might be, and was messaging with Buddhist Insights a while ago, and we discussed doing a kind of audio/video blog post almost, where maybe I discuss some things about the Sri Lankan forest tradition, and then they can go ahead and maybe splice in some photos for that. So kind of a multimedia blog post. So I've been here in Sri Lanka now for almost 2 years, and so I'm not an expert at the Sri Lankan forest tradition by any means, but have had the lovely opportunity to stay here and to learn from the culture, learn from the monks, and also to be in some very beautiful and inspiring environments. And so I thought that maybe we could just start with a little overview. This is, again, a little unusual because usually just kind of start talking and hope that it goes well. But here I've actually written down a few points for an outline for this discussion. So I thought that we'd talk a little bit about the history of Sri Lanka first. So basically Sri Lanka was almost founded, was very soon after it was colonized from India. Very soon after it was colonized from India, it became a Buddhist country. And it did so through, basically through King Ashoka. He sent a missionary, his son Mahinda, and his son came and converted most of the island. And King Ashoka at the time was probably, the most powerful monarch in the area, in the kind of Indian subcontinent area. And so actually his missionary efforts spread Buddhism to, Gandhara, basically even to the Greek areas in India and to other areas, basically all around India. He renounced conquest, and Sri Lanka was one of them. And so from that time, basically, Sri Lanka's had a very strong affiliation with Buddhism. It's kind of, after the death of Buddhism in India, preserved the Theravada tradition. So it's basically because of the efforts of the monks who were here, and and the efforts of Buddhists in Sri Lanka that now we still have a Pali Canon, we still have a Theravada tradition because of this particular island. And so because it was so strongly rooted, and Sri Lanka basically developed, there were many times it was invaded by South India. And even in its biggest epic of history is called the Mahavamsa, and the hero is a king named Duttagamani who fights a Tamil king named Ilara, and they basically he shows quite a lot of respect for his enemy, and Ilara is pictured as a virtuous person. But throughout the history of Sri Lanka, they've had these sometimes very intense situations arise in which sometimes Buddhism almost seemed like it could have been wiped out. And so through all of this, they've managed to preserve it. Perhaps one of the most intense was when, there's many, but one of them was when the canon was almost lost due to these wars and invasions from South India. And they decided to write it down. And it's probably because of this that we still have the Theravadan canon. So Sri Lanka has this amazing Buddhist history, amazing Buddhist culture, and it's something that actually stretches right to the present. One can see this when one goes out into the forest, sometimes goes different places, because one will see these kind of ancient drip ledges chiseled into some caves where monks stayed thousands of years ago. And so Sri Lanka is also an interesting country because it has these different climate zones. It seems like it's basically what you've got. My knowledge of my knowledge of geography is not not an A+ on the test, but in any event, basically it's an island, and it seems like it's mountainous in the center, and the mountains gradually slope down. So what this means is that the country has these different climate zones to it. And you can go up into the more mountainous areas, kind of what they call New Aurelia, and I'm from Canada. It's like Canada weather in the early fall. It's kind of maybe nighttime goes down to 11 and daytime is in the 20s, something like this. And it seems basically like this all year round. And then you can go further up north, and apparently it's very hot. I've never been there. It's in the 50s. And then there's places where it's kind of a moderate climate, maybe 27, 28 in the day and goes down to 21 at night. On top of that, you've got these different types of places. You have the very mountainous regions. I think the British planted a lot of pine trees and these kind of things. So you have these kind of cooler type vegetation. And in other areas, you have quite a lot of rain. So it's really a rain forest, you kind of feel. And in the area I'm in right now, it's a little bit temperate. So, it's not really it's not so much of a rain forest. You have these different patches sometimes too that look like a savanna with rocks and very tall grasses. So because it starts with a mountain in the center and goes down, it's actually a very beautiful country. It's kind of many places where these amazing vistas are there. And I remember when I first came here, and we'd go up some mountain, I'd be taking photos, and the monks who've been here for a while would be like, yeah, Sri Lanka's like this. And it's true. Basically, almost every place you go, so many places you go, you have these stunning vistas when you go out into the wilderness. And it's because it's kind of this bit of a cascade, it seems like, from the higher mountainous areas down to the coast. So it's really quite a blessed country with its climate, which has these different zones for people of different characters, but is generally agreeable all year round. It has plenty of rain. It's good for growing food. And it's basically a very fertile and beautiful country. So another thing is that they've basically done an excellent job preserving their forests. So Sri Lanka has quite a lot of forest cover. And what this means is that there's quite a lot of places for monks to go. So there's some places where you have a kind of a national park. And I remember going to this one national park. We were going to a monastery that was in the national park, and there were safaris on the road to the monastery. And the national park is populated with animals, almost like you would see people. So, the national parks in Canada are very beautiful and stunning. But the animal life, especially large animal life, is not as apparent. But in Sri Lanka, in these national parks, you can see like some elephant in the distance, and you can see these kind of buffalo type animals, and it's basically almost seems to be quite a lot of life there. And again, within these forests are the ruins of these ancient monasteries. So I remember as a young man, I used to watch this movie called Indiana Jones. It was very popular then, where he would go into these forests and find these ancient treasures. And Sri Lanka is a bit like that in real life. I mean, not so much that one will go into the forest to find ancient treasures, but one will go into the forest and there'll be some ancient monument. And actually, there were treasures buried around those things. So sometimes you'll see places where treasure hunters have broken parts of the monument and looked for treasure that's been sealed there. So it's this country with this stunning history and stunning kind of, forests. And because the country has such a long association with Buddhism, it's perfectly acceptable for monks to go into the forest and for monks to stay in the forest. Maybe not perfectly acceptable in the national parks. It's not so allowed, but they have these different zones. And generally the people seem very supportive of having monks go to stay in the forest, and very pleased when they're there. So it's almost an ideal situation for forest-dwelling monks. Basically, almost any type of climate one's body is suited to, as long as it's not suited to sub-zero snow, one can find. And there's these very ancient, inspiring monuments, and the people here will sometimes say, oh yeah, those caves, Arhants. They would say that Arhants stayed in those caves. So there's this cultural memory of there being many, many Arhants living in Sri Lanka. And as one goes around the country, one sometimes hears these stories about the history of the country. There may be this place up on this cave where that was a place in ancient times where monks used to climb up and kick down the ladder and just stay there until they died. Basically, they had 7 days to become Arhants, and they would never come down after that. And you have these stories of, of times when there were, say, be like a kind of famine, and monks in the one national park, there were all Arhants there, and monks in another, they would come to meet, and the sky was darkened by the number of Arhants flying. So, of course, one never knows, one doesn't necessarily know exactly what happened in history, but there's this very strong cultural memory, very strong cultural knowledge of Buddhist practice and what it is that monks do and what they did in ancient times, more or less. So it's very interesting. I went Pindapata, I've been going Pindapata here, and I went Pindapata down south. And in the southern part of the country, there were no, as far as I'm aware, there were no monks in that area who were going Pindapata. But the customs that the people do are almost the same. When you show up at their door, they run, they get the spoon, they get the dish, they serve it to you, and then they usually bow down, doing almost the exact same thing all over the country. So I was curious about this and asking some different people, how do people know how to do this if there's no monks going Pindapat in that particular area right now? But it seems that there's somehow this kind of very strong cultural understanding of what monks do and how to support them in that exists here in Sri Lanka. So, speaking of Sri Lankan culture, so basically, culturally, most of the zones that a monk or a monastic or a lay Buddhist will go into are the zones where there's a, you might call, it's kind of a mixed culture, but the zones where there's a Buddhist culture, which is mainly upheld by Sinhalese people. And so the Buddhist culture here is very strong. So actually in this village close by, sometimes I'll walk through the village on the way to the kuti, coming from the main monastery to here at night, and or close to night, at night and close to night. And there's sometimes you can see or hear people in people's houses them playing these kind of parita chants, or these these Buddhist chants at night. And instead of you hearing the football game or whatever it might be, you hear these kind of Buddhist chants. And it seems that this is not just in this area. It's kind of the strength of Buddhism is very palpable. So similar to the way, like in the West, you might have like a stadium of people going to see a concert, which I'm sure happens here. But there's at least one monk who has a monastery nearby, and when he gives Dhamma talks, it's to almost like a stadium full of people, apparently. And so there's this great interest in the Dhamma here. It's kind of completely ingrained in the culture. And people have this liking and desire for monks to be around. They don't see it as a burden if a monk goes Pindapat every day in a village. They come to like it, and they want a monk to be there. So it's interesting, as a monk going to different areas in Sri Lanka, if they have a kuti or a cave there, sometimes the people will actually try to convince you to stay. they'll try to get you to stay in the kuti or the cave because they like having monks so much. So this is something that's been amazing for me to see coming from Canada, which is obviously not a Buddhist country and has some Buddhism, but is basically just this incredible support, liking, and faith for the Dhamma. And partially this may be because people are raised very young from being Buddhists, but it's also likely because they have developed a very strong sense of how to gain happiness through dana, especially, is what I've seen in Sri Lanka. The culture of dana, or giving, is extremely strong here. So it's interesting because, in Canada or different places, Canada's a very cold country, but still there's homeless people in Toronto, especially the downtown area. So one will see them, and of course it's unfortunate and it's kind of very sad. One of the amazing things in Sri Lanka here that I've seen is that there's very few homeless people in the country. And the culture of dana here is so strong that apparently there's people who they get food together and they drive around looking for people to give it to. So if there was a homeless person, I'm basically certain, they would be cared for by the people through this culture of generosity, through this culture of dana. So I was coming back from Pindapat the other day, and I saw this family who I sometimes pass, and they had all these buckets of food. And so I was coming back and I passed their house, and they came out and offered some Pindapat, and I said, did you offer dana at the Pansala, which is a temple? And they said, no, Balata. And I was like, Balata, what's Balata? Balata means a shrine? And Bala is a word that I've heard many times before, but it just didn't register. So Bala in Sinhalese means dog. And Balata, they were saying, they basically got all this dana together. It looked really well prepared, the curries and rice. And they basically drove down the street to offer food to stray dogs. And they kind of wanted to offer this food to the dogs. So there's this incredible culture of caring that exists here. So as a monk being in Sri Lanka, I've never really felt in danger of so much of not getting enough food, or in danger so much of not being well cared for. There's this capacity of the villagers in each village to basically, once you go into the village, they almost automatically integrate a monk into the village. And the village has this informal network that I hadn't seen so much in the West in my generation. I think in my grandfather's generation it was there. But there's this informal network where people somehow find out about you and find out about what you need, and they basically integrate you into the village and provide you with what you need to stay there. So just walking into a village and just staying on the outskirts of a village as a monk here, one basically feels like one's part of the village. And it basically feels like being part of a big family. So I think that this is another thing that I've seen in the way that the lay people interact with the monks is, it's not, in the West there's very strong transactional relationships. Like one will, give this, and in return people give this. There's almost a discrete relationship. So, a monk will give a meditation class, people come to the meditation class, and they go, something like this. But not 100%. But in Sri Lanka, the people in the village consider, if they're older women, they tend to consider you like their son. And if they're younger or something, they consider you like their brother. So there's usually each kuti has one person assigned to take care of it. One family takes responsibility for that kuti, the monk and the kuti. And those people are called kapiyakarus. And so the kapiyakaru for this kuti, I was calling her Nona, which means Mrs., as far as my understanding. And she said, that's not good. Call me Upasaka Amma, which means Mother Upasaka. And so one gets the sense that the people really think of one as part of their family. And so they have this kind of almost like concentric rings of care and closeness that extend actually very, very far. So it's a very warm and kind and generous culture. And it's a culture in which basically as a monk, one never needs to feel, will basically never feel, so long as one's in a Buddhist area, that one will, die of starvation or something like this, unless there's a famine, but in general. And in general, one feels very well cared for, almost as if one's in a family. So this is the incredible cultural support for Buddhism that I've seen here in Sri Lanka. So as far as practices go here in Sri Lanka, there's dana is very strong. Also, I think sila is very strong among the lay people. Quite strong. Every Poya day, every full moon day, they tend to keep 8 precepts, which is quite good. They keep it the whole day. And meditation is also growing here. The main types of meditation in Sri Lanka are kind of is heavily influenced by Burma. So there's quite a lot of Goenka meditation here, quite a lot of Mahasi meditation, and Pawak meditation. These are the main types that one might encounter here in Sri Lanka. But living within a monastery, life in the monastery is actually very free. Tends to be very free. So it's not usually the case. A monk has quite a lot of free time during the day. Basically, most of the day they can devote to meditation, and oftentimes they don't kind of, at least at the monastery I'm at, and I think many others, they don't necessarily check to enforce that you do a particular method of meditation. So there's quite a lot of freedom in that way. And one of the nice things too about Sri Lanka for Western meditators is that the country actually has a reasonably long history of, reasonably long compared to Sri Lanka has a long history in general, but has a as far as Buddhism in the West goes, it has a reasonably long history compared to the history of Buddhism in the West, of Westerners taking part in Buddhism here. So one of the Buddhist renaissances in Sri Lanka was actually supported by a man named Henry Steele Olcott. He came over from America with another person named Madame Blavatsky, who's a Russian. They were both in the Theosophical Society. And he took the 5 precepts, becoming a Buddhist. And this was, I think, in the 1800s, at a time when there wasn't many Western Buddhists. And so he actually organized a kind of counter-Christian movement, a movement to shore up Buddhist identity in the face of foreign rule. And he was the one who basically invented this Buddhist flag that basically one now sees all over Sri Lanka. And I think is so highly regarded that they actually I heard they had him on one of the stamps in Sri Lanka. Also, one of the first monasteries for training Western monks, founded by a Western monk, was in Sri Lanka, and that was the island hermitage, Polgastua, by Venerable Nyanatiloka. And that produced many famous disciples. It produced Venerable Nyanaponika and the Buddhist Publication Society, and it produced also solitary monks such as Venerable Nyanavira and more recently Nyanadipa Bhante. And it also produced a very famous wandering monk named Nyanavimala Bhante. And so these monks are greatly revered by Westerners in general and known by Sri Lankans. So there is this kind of comfort, I guess you'd say, with Western monks, or there's a history of Western monks making a contribution to Buddhism in Sri Lanka, which is another kind of very positive factor here. So all in all, Sri Lanka, from what I've seen so far, is basically a very highly excellent place to practice Buddhism in the present day. There's many forests. So if a monk wants to go and practice in solitude in the forest, coming from Nyanadipa Bhante, and also from history, there's quite an acceptance of monks basically living alone in the forest, going for Pindapata, coming back, and not being involved in any teaching. It's basically devoting their whole day to solitude, to meditation, and however they choose to spend their day. And so this is an excellent factor in Sri Lanka that I haven't seen in any other place that I've been to so far. Also, the climate is very excellent, so it gives a lot of opportunities for what one might call charika or tudong. In Thailand, they call it tudong. And because there's so many forests and so much beauty, one can travel through the forests and go wandering and come out in another village and either stay at the pansala. In some cases, if the government doesn't mind, one can stay in the forest and basically camp out there with the glot or with whatever one might use, and then continue wandering on. Because of these cultural supports, it makes this traditional Buddhist wandering lifestyle a possibility here. And it makes some of the traditional Buddhist practices, such as staying at the root of a tree and staying in the forest, these kind of things are a real possibility and very widely accepted. And because of its kind of openness, and it's also possible to come here on one's own initiative, or it's also possible to come and stay here and basically practice on one's own initiative. One can use the suttas as a guide, or one can practice whatever meditation method one feels. It's a country that suits well for people with an individual temperament, because the culture and the setup here allows for quite a lot of individual freedom. So basically it's a rare opportunity to be in Sri Lanka at a time like this. It's very peaceful. It's got quite a lot of excellent support for Buddhism. It has excellent history. One can be inspired by it. It has excellent locations in the forest where one can travel, one can meditate. It has a history of inspiring Western monks, and their legacy can still be felt, especially Jnanadeepa Bhante and even Jnanavimala Bhante in the Charika that's coming up now. And there's also monks living here now who are going wandering, going on Charika. There's one monk, the most senior Charika monk in Sri Lanka. His name is Amatasiri Bhante, and he apparently took a vow basically never to take a vehicle. So he just walks everywhere on foot and has been doing that for, I think, more than 2 decades. So I feel very lucky to be in this country, to have the opportunity to practice here. I feel very lucky to have the chance to observe this culture, kind of an amazing culture, which I basically wouldn't even have imagined, these kind of possibilities. And to be inspired by some of the excellent monks that I've met here. And so all in all, this is a good time to be in Sri Lanka. It's an inspiring time to be in Sri Lanka, and it's an excellent place to practice Buddhism and to strive for the Buddhist goal. So I think that's pretty much all the reflections that I might have for now. Again, I'm not an expert on the Sri Lankan forest tradition, Sri Lankan practicing in the forest in Sri Lanka. But those are just a few reflections for this blog post. So I hope that everybody has a great day wherever it might be, and wishing all the blessings of Dhamma practice.